Many Christians dream of stepping foot in the places where Jesus walked and taught, of seeing the land of the Bible come to life before their eyes. For centuries, Christians have taken pilgrimages to the Holy Land, the historic land of Palestine, to see the stories of their faith take shape in stone structures and lush desert valleys. The Christian tradition shares this region as a religious birthplace with Judaism, and with Islam as a place of divine revelation. And yet, Christians have maintained a unique relationship with the land of the Bible and its holy sites since the 4th century CE. Trips to the Holy Land are ubiquitous for maze-filled walks through the vibrant old city of Jerusalem, boat rides on the Sea of Galilee, followed by a meal of St. Peter's fish, reading passages of scripture from hilltops and olive groves, and visiting the holy city of Jesus' birth, from Shepherd's Field to Manger. Yet, between the lines of this Bible-colored view, there are the stark realities of those who live in the land, those whose stories often remain unheard by tour groups and religious pilgrims. Tourism in the Holy Land stops short of telling the whole story of the land, from biblical times to today. And the question begs, what lies in between, or perhaps right under our noses? What happens when Holy Land tours go beyond checkpoints and separation walls and leave no living stone unturned? Welcome to Touring the Holy Land, a brand new series with Across the Divide podcast. This episode will be one of sharing stories, a very fitting way to begin this series on Holy Land tourism. All throughout the series, we'll hear stories from everyday Christians who have had experiences visiting Palestine-Israel that they want to share. Maybe the reasons that fueled their trips there, their desire to be in the birthplace of their faith, and the realities that they experienced along the way. Maybe things that were troubling to them. What narratives did they hear? What voices didn't they hear? We'll get into all of this, but to start, I want to take us way back. We're going to start back in the 4th century CE, several decades after Jesus lived and taught and walked in the historic land of Palestine. Now, this is when Christian pilgrimage to the land really began. In the 4th century, Empress Helena, the mother of Constantine, traveled to historic Palestine to aid in the Christianization of the Roman Empire. She sought out sites that might have aligned with biblical events and sought to claim them as holy and part of the Christian tradition. She sent out crews and teams and marked particular sites as holy biblical sites, many of which became celebrated Christian relics, churches, and pilgrimage destinations, such as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the Old City of Jerusalem and the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. Now, Helena's determination of location and redemption of holy sites assumed an illegitimate relationship of those who already inhabited the land and their religious practices. She ordered that any trace of them be cleared away from those sites, and that they be and appear markedly Christian. She reclaimed sacred places for Christianity in the region, which began a whole tradition of Christian pilgrimage to the land, but it was also one that was rooted in Western imperialistic assumptions, right? That locations of biblical stories could be found scientifically. This gives birth to biblical archaeology later. But for now, we'll leave it there, and we'll get into the history in our next episode. Today, several million international tourists visit Israel each year. It's estimated that upwards of a quarter of those tourists are Christians. And the country with the highest number of visitors, the United States, is the winner by far, with nearly 1 million tourists visiting Israel in 2019 alone. Now, In the US especially, there's no shortage of organizations and tour companies that promise Christians the trip of their lifetime, where they can see the land of the Bible come to life before them. There are uniquely situated organizations like Passages Israel, who market to college students, aiming to strengthen their relationship with Christ and allow them an opportunity to encounter Israel through highly subsidized trips to the region. The About page on their website states that, quote, "The future of Christian faith and leadership in America, as well as positive engagement with Israel, depends on the next generation of Christian leaders being deeply rooted in their biblical faith and values, as well as being exposed to modern Israel firsthand." End quote. Encounter with modern Israel here is cloaked in a need to form American Christian leaders, but elsewhere in the passage's public presence, their intention to cultivate support for Israel, for young Christians to stand with Israel, is clear. Other Christian Zionist groups, such as Christians United for Israel, or CUFI, offer specially curated trips to Israel for different groups, with one specifically for pastors, which claims to offer, quote, "pastors with a biblically focused, educational, and impactful experience in the Holy Land. Walk where our Savior walked, see biblical stories come to life, and witness the strength and kindness of the Jewish people firsthand." These are some of the more salient examples of trips that offer a tour of the Bible lands while also linking that ancient past to a contemporary geopolitical present, suggesting that Christians ought to think a particular way about it because of their biblical faith. Now, there are countless other manifestations of Christian Holy Land tours, but a pervasive theme or approach is to focus on the biblical. Holy sites, archaeological discoveries, and exceptionally beautiful landscapes are the focus of most trips, which means that contemporary realities in Palestine-Israel often fall to the wayside or are intentionally avoided altogether. What stories of the land and its history does the average Christian tourist hear? And what are the gaps in those stories? Whose voices go unheard? And what is the effect of this?
On March 7th and 8th, our friends at Telos are organizing a solidarity and action gathering in New Orleans. It is intended for peacemakers, pastors, artists, and anyone else who wants to participate in building power in the movement for dignity and human rights in Palestine and Israel. We will hear from and be led by the next generation of Palestinian Christian leaders who are challenging the American church to own their responsibility and opportunity to participate in the possibility of justice, rather than remaining indifferent in the face of violence and genocide. And most importantly, we will strategize together how to reach each of our own contexts while growing movement-wide action. I will be there, and I would love to see you there as well. Join the movement of leaders choosing to speak truth to power with a bold and unified voice in defense of the dignity of our Palestinian siblings and on behalf of the future of all in Palestine and Israel. Register for this gathering at telosgroup.org/gathering 2025, telosgroup.org/gathering 2025.
Now, I've been collecting stories from everyday Christians, those who listen to Across the Divide and their friends, about their experiences visiting Palestine-Israel and participating in Christian tours of the land. I've had conversations with some of them and will be weaving parts of their stories throughout the series. When asked what their main impetus was for wanting to visit, many indicated the religious and spiritual significance for them. Kim said, "I had always wanted to visit the Holy Land, to walk where Jesus walked, and see and experience the places mentioned in the Bible." All the cliches. Thomas said, "I was interested in the religious significance of the Holy Land, and I was hoping to be exposed to a part of the world, a history, a context, and a branch of Christianity I felt like I did not know enough about." And Margie said, I wanted to visit biblical locations I've known of since childhood. These are very common reasons that Christians visit the Holy Land and are ones that have been pervasive across time and context. And so we'll dig into what those experiences were like and why it is that this is the predisposition of so many Christians, why it is that we want to see the place where the Bible was written, the place where Jesus walked, again and again. Another story. In the summer of 2018, I was volunteering in Bethlehem, staying at the main Lutheran church in Bethlehem, Christmas Lutheran Church. And while I was there, one Sunday, actually, most Sundays, tourist groups would often come through. Perhaps they'd stay a night at the church there or somewhere nearby. They might have participated in a talk with a pastor there. They might have watched a performance of a cultural event. Sometimes they would join church on Sunday. And so one Sunday, I was mingling with a group of international tourists at coffee hour after the service, and I found myself in conversation with a wonderful person and asked them what they thought about being in Bethlehem and how their experience had been thus far being in the West Bank. I asked them, had they been elsewhere in the West Bank during their tour, or was this their first time? They looked at me a little bit confused, perhaps, and then finally said, "Oh, is that where we are? I wasn't really sure. The bus has been taking us here and there, and we got in just in time for the performance last night. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly where I was." Now, this kind of experience is not unique. This way for tourists to be shuttled from here to there in a tour bus without knowing where it is they're going or where they've come from or the places they've traveled through to get there sounds quite shocking, but makes a little bit more sense if we get into the details of it. Tours are often packed full to maximize on the time that visitors are there, and they often have very tight schedules. Getting folks from a lunch to a tour of a historical site to a place where they can do a little bit of shopping to a church to an overlook to read scripture to another church, etc. And so it's not uncommon for tourists to feel frazzled or not quite have an understanding of where exactly they are, let alone in a land or geography that they're not familiar with. Now, Reverend Dr. Munter Itzhak, Palestinian pastor, actually the pastor at that church while I was there, remarks in his book, The Other Side of the Wall, a Palestinian Christian narrative of lament and hope. He remarks that Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land only spend an average of a few hours on the other side of the wall. And what he means by that is in the West Bank, in the occupied Palestinian territories, in an area most likely separated by the separation wall. He says most are not even aware that they are in Palestine. Itzhak critiques the blind spots of this tourism model, suggesting that, quote, for most pilgrims, the Holy Land is a large-scale fairyland. They are here only to walk where Jesus walked, enjoy the boat ride in the Sea of Galilee, and visit the notable Jewish sites. To them, the land is empty. History stopped in the 70s CE. Oftentimes, it's as if tourists experience the Holy Land in snapshots. They're carted around on tour buses from holy sites to panoramic overview, and the awe-inspiring experiences that they often experience at these sites can be overpowering, sometimes clouding their vision from seeing the contemporary realities in the land, or perhaps obscuring the whole picture altogether. This kind of experience allows them to check off each desired stop on their biblical theme park brochure while perhaps remaining unaware of the world outside that theme park. All the while, the realities of the land continue. A military occupation, increased violence, military checkpoints, and so much more.
This episode is supported by Peace Catalyst International. Across the Divide has joined forces with Peace Catalyst International to amplify the pursuit of peace and to explore the vital intersection of Christian faith and social justice in Palestine-Israel. Both Peace Catalyst and Across the Divide are committed to equipping Christians worldwide to move beyond apathy and into active solidarity, working together for a holistic and just peace for everyone in the land. By supporting this partnership, you can help elevate Palestinian voices and initiatives working for peace all over the world. Visit Peace Catalyst International's website to learn more about their work and consider giving to them directly or supporting us through our page on the Peace Catalyst website. The link is available in the show notes below. Together, we can equip Christians to begin following Jesus in his sacred and healing work for a just peace.
Now, as far as my own story goes, I didn't first travel to Palestine-Israel as a tourist, but as a student. My experience, though, was still highly curated. I was studying at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with primarily Jewish and Christian Americans, but also those from other countries. I experienced the land in a college study abroad excursion kind of way. I went on a lot of field trips organized by the university, but still in those trips and in my exploration of different parts of the land, different historic, even biblical sites, many of the narratives I learned were told through the lens of Zionism and Israeli nationalism. Mentions of Arabs were largely negative, equating them broadly with violence, terrorism, and ignorance, a timeless colonial trope on repeat. And it wasn't until several months into my time there that I began to hear different stories about the history of the land and the contemporary realities. My first experience of traveling to the West Bank was a trip that I took with a couple of friends after mentors, professors, other folks in my orbit had repeatedly warned me not to do so. I was told that it was dangerous to go into the West Bank. I was told that I should not go alone and that it would be better not to go at all. And despite those warnings, I knew that there was something that I needed to encounter there. And as a Christian, I was also interested in visiting Bethlehem and seeing the place where Jesus was born and seeing what that town was like today. And so when I went, who I actually met and saw, the stories that I heard were shocking. They were quite different from those I was told that I would hear. And the people that I met, everywhere I met, people with incredible kindness and hospitality beyond what I could have imagined. I was received at a Palestinian Christian guest house with gifts of tea and snacks. And my hosts were so concerned about me that they wanted to make sure that I had the best visit that I could there. And so before I knew it, I had a private tour booked with a Palestinian taxi driver who took me and my friends all over to see places I wouldn't have saw in another way. Now, this story is a unique one. Many don't get to explore the land without a group, and many don't get to go where it is the locals tell them to go. Many don't get to hear the stories the Palestinians, let alone Palestinian Christians, would tell you when you walk into their home for a meal. But some of our listeners have had experiences like these. While many of them felt drawn to spiritual pilgrimage in the Holy Land and an interest in seeing places where biblical stories took shape, Many of them also expressed a desire to become more educated about the contemporary realities in Palestine-Israel and a curiosity about the things they hadn't learned in church. One of our listeners said, "I wanted to better understand the history, culture, and the people. I wanted to learn more about the conflict and the thoughts and attitudes of Israelis and Palestinians." Someone else said, "I was looking to learn more about the history of the conflict from both sides." Many who we heard from intentionally chose to go on dual narrative tours. And we'll get into what that means in a later episode. And several of our listeners went explicitly with the aim to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Now, we won't just highlight the things that are confusing or frustrating, or quite honestly, the way that the Holy Land tourism industry plays into propaganda about Israel-Palestine and its contemporary realities. We'll also be highlighting the undercurrents and the voices that disrupt this narrative all throughout this series. We'll explore the history of Christian tourism in the Holy Land, getting all the way back to Queen Helena's story that I mentioned at the beginning here. We'll explore the role of biblical archaeology and how biblical archaeological sites and the curation of history, the narratives that are told at biblical sites, impacts what it is that tourists learn about the land and how they experience it. We'll look into the ways that tourism is shaped by the Israeli occupation and the ways that that is both seen and unseen by tourists. This series will consider the domination of Christian Zionism and Jewish and secular tourist organizations in this industry. We'll delve into the movement of alternative tourism, led primarily by Palestinians, and the avenues that exist to engage in tourism that is educational beyond the spiritual religious. And we'll explore how these opportunities offer foreigners opportunities to be in solidarity with Palestinians. Throughout the series, we'll hear from Israelis and Palestinians, from scholars, tour guides, activists, and Christian leaders, and everyday people. Together, we'll explore the dominant narratives of Holy Land tourism and how they came to be. And we'll learn from the experiences of those who have traveled to Palestine-Israel and have a story to tell. Now, if you're listening here in the spring of 2025, you'll be traveling along with us as this series unfolds. We'll be releasing episodes on the first and third Tuesday of every month, beginning now in February of 2025 through June of this year. So grab your boots and your suitcase and stick with us, because we're on a journey and we have an important trip to take together. See you next time, friends.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Across the Divide. We are so grateful for your support and interest. The hosts of this podcast are Daniel Bannoura, Jennifer Madrand, and myself, Abir Shhali. Salim Anfous is our producer. Our theme music is composed by Charlie Rishmawi. To help sustain the work of this podcast, please consider becoming a financial supporter of Across the Divide. Any donation amount makes a difference, and with a donation of as little as $5 a month, you will gain access to exclusive supporter-only content. Go to patreon.com/acrossthedivide to learn more and donate. For any feedback or suggestions, connect with us on Instagram at Across the Divide Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, stay engaged, and join us again on Across the Divide.